From past presentations I have been doing, there's a few things I need to say right off the get-go. I'm not pro-oil. I'm not anti-oil. I'm usually the guy that most oil companies don't like to see on their sites. I'm just going to be going over the, oh, whoops, wrong button. There we go. Just going to be going over the rules, regulations, try to clarify some of the misconceptions about fracking that are out there, and then also go through some other concerns and issues that citizens have brought to me, and I've also had from questions from previous discussions. So, kind of going over the outline, what is the Office of Oil, Gas, and Minerals? Because a lot of people don't know that people are actually watching these oil companies while they're drilling and doing stuff, but there are people actually keeping an eye on them. Going over the Collingwood Utica development, that's what really kind of brought this hydrofracking issue to Michigan's attention. What is hydraulic fracturing? The Antrim play, water withdrawal assessment tool, so that we actually keep an eye, keep an eye on the water that they use. Looking forward and summary. Basically, Office of Oil, Gas, and Minerals, we're here from cradle to grave, theoretical cradle to grave, on oil and gas drilling. Companies obviously aren't going to tell us what's going on, because then once the state knows, they have to tell everybody else, and there goes their plays of what they want to do for an oil and gas drilling project. But from permitting, there is a full review of the permits to make sure that the casing, sealing, cementing process, everything along those lines is actually gone over, verified, and ensured that there is a competent sealing, casing program and protection of the Michigan, natural resources. Through drilling completion, we're on site to make sure that they're drilling using the proper fluids. If there are a little bit of spills here and there, that they clean them up instantly, take care of the stuff, lined reserve pits, a lot of other stuff. Some of the stuff looks like people might not be able to read at the bottom, but then while the well, if it's a producer, production, facility construction, secondary containment, things to make sure that this stuff is kept where it's supposed to be and not in our groundwater, because everybody likes fresh water to drink. Plugging and final site restoration. So we write the plug-in instructions, make sure they're doing it. In fact, my apologies, I didn't realize this was going to be so big. I don't have a shirt or tie on. I just came from watching a plug-in program that I've been stuck on for the last week, so my apologies for my drab appearance. So permitting, surface ownership and mineral ownership. That's one of the things that really causes a lot of problems. Thanks to English law established way before I was even thought of, mineral ownership is allowed to be fractured from surface ownership. How much that might be annoyance, I'm sorry, I have no control over it. But if you're the mineral owner, you do have control over those minerals, and you have the right to either lease or not lease your property. There are other things that can come into that, and we'll discuss those later. Surface ownership, they still have to get permission from you if you are just a surface owner to be able to come onto your property. You don't get any of the nice mineral rights or anything along those lines, but there's that stuff. Your site location, where the drill pad's going to be located, wetlands, natural protected species, soil erosion processes, things like that along those drilling pads. We go through every detail of this before they go in to drill it. Your soil erosion and sedimentation control, isolation distances, you have to be a certain amount of distance from structures, water wells, etc. And then your reserve pit, which is down here at the bottom, the location, if allowable, you'll notice, if you can't see that, it says if allowable. And that's because some locations you can't have reserve pits on because the groundwater is too close to the surface, or other issues might be presenting of situations that you can't have that. There'll be a question, I'm going to try to get through this real quick so that we can have some questions and answers, but I will call on you first, sir, when we get.
Zoning and spacing. Does Michigan law allow for local zoning ordinances to deal with this issue?
With the drilling in, no. The state has the right to it. And it's, with the companies not being able, there'd be too many options out there for companies to keep us track of, is what I'm understanding from up the chain above me. So the state just has the spacing and zoning issues for that. So we'll go to the next one. So permitting and casing. So the casing, like I was saying, we go through and review that. The surface casing, the first one, is basically made to ensure that groundwater is protected. You have to go 100 feet into competent bedrock and below the lowest known freshwater aquifer. Now, this can fluctuate in multiple depths. There's formations that locations I've been at where I've had surface casing down to 900 feet, if not deeper. There's other ones where I've only had it to 500 feet, maybe 300. It just depends on the area geology. There's a lot of science behind this stuff, and I am a geologist and I like rocks, so make your judgments right now, but I'll be kind of going over this stuff and the different rock mechanics and things along those lines. Your intermediate casing is something that's used on some of your deeper wells. It's basically just to ensure that there is more competency to the well bore, make sure that there is more safety and that it's actually sealed off so we have another safety control point for the well drilling. Contingency strings can be used if there's local hazards in geology of like lost zones or overpressurized formations. Salt structures like to collapse occasionally, and so maybe you need a little bit stronger pipe in the hole. Your production casing all the way down needs to be cemented back up so that there is a good seal around that target formation. With the new the horizontal stuff that's really starting to spark a bunch of interest with the citizens, there are new casing rules and cementing procedures that are in place for that one that have got a little bit more protection to it than we had before. And the blowout preventer. Please do not associate what happened in the deep water horizon with what happens on a surface drilling platform. It's a lot easier to look at a blowout preventer at the surface, maintain it, make sure everything's working, and ensure that it's actually working at right here, touchable distance, as compared to 5,000 feet below the water. So I just want to get that out there real quick. So over the blowout preventers, what they need, reviewed by staff, local geo, I already said those. So drilling completion, like I said, field staff, like me, we're on site to make sure that they're drilling, doing things right. Your reserve pit liners are all set and intact and there's no rips, tears, or anything along those lines. Here's a picture in the lower right of a BOP, and there's a rig. Surface casing. This is going to make it look like it goes real quick, but drilling can take 3 days to 60 days, or maybe even further, depending on what they're actually doing. So if you're looking at your leases and somebody's looking at you, you could have a rig drilling next to you for a long time, a lot of sleepless nights. Keep that in mind. But with that, with your surface casing, it doesn't go that fast when they drill it in there. They got to go down 100 feet on this is showing where the base of the fresh water is, and we'll say that it's a competent bedrock for this presentation. They run their surface casing in, they cement it back to surface. They have to wait 12 hours before they can even touch that casing and drill out to go into the next one. Your intermediate casing string on some of these deeper holes that you'd end up using, once again, they drill it, go into the casing, cement it back up, and then there we go. Now your production casing, with these horizontal wells that is causing all the buzz about this hydraulic fracturing, there are a couple of companies that, you'll notice the different kind of setup here. A couple of companies like to go down, drill a vertical well, and actually core. You end up getting a 3 to 4 inch core of that rock so you can see what it's made of. Is it worth doing the horizontal section, or should we just cut our losses and get out of here now? So they'll end up drilling that. They end up having to plug that all the way back to what's known as your kick point. The kick point is basically just where a company's going to start that nice bend to go into the horizontal section. That can last up to about a quarter mile in order to get that to go. I know, steel pipe bending, kind of funny to think about, but over a quarter mile, a lot of things are possible. So then they, depending on how long they're going to run that horizontal. Production, companies cannot create production facilities without our approval. They have to submit plans, we change them a lot. To make sure that there's secondary containment underneath these tanks and things along those lines. Their flow lines have to be pressure tested. Your response, if there is a spill, even if it's contained in there, they have to make sure everything's taken care of and safe. And we have routine inspections to cover it. Are we there 24/7? No, but we do go there quite a bit, and it's pretty easy to tell if there's non-native soil where there used to be a nice patch of grass. So you can find out what's going on there. And then Lansing has production and records review to ensure that everything that we're seeing out there on location is actually what the companies are submitting for truth. Plug-in and final site restoration, we issue the plug-in instructions. We make sure that they get the system so there's no erosional conditions. The one thing is they're not going to make it back to that beautiful prairie you might have had before. They're going to go in, they level it. It becomes a flat square. So most of your average ones around Berry County would be maybe a 200 by 200 by maybe 300 by 300 site. Hydraulic fracturing pads require a lot more space. They're massive. They're a lot bigger. So you are going to have a nice open wooded area. If it was a wooded area, they don't plant the trees again. They just go out there, seed it, make sure that there's no erosional issues, vegetation's established, the well's cut and capped below grade, what's known as plowable depth. It's about 4 to 5 feet down, and that's what you end up with if it's a dry hole. Dry hole, non-producible quantities, or no oil or gas shown. So Michigan Basin geology. A lot of things about hydraulic fracturing really depend on your geology. Michigan has fantastic geology, but I'm a geologist, so I think that. If you look here on your bedrock geology map on the left of the screen, what you see is there's a line going from the northwest to the southeast. What that is it's going to show this cross-section on the right side. It's showing the different beds of this. The stuff at the bottom, Precambrian rock, really solid igneous metamorphic type complexes, no one really is interested in. But you got your different ages of your rocks, and in those are different formations that have oil and gas bearing formations. One of them is the Antrim Shale, which we'll be talking about, which is a relatively shallow one that has had a lot of play in up north, the northern peninsula, or the northern lower peninsula, and the Utica Collingwood Shale, which has brought this really to the forefront of the media and citizens' concerns, which is also in the northern lower peninsula. None of those are, well, we'll discuss that later. So, Utica Collingwood, pretty deep. But as you saw from that bowl-shaped geology, depths vary depending on where you are in the state. Our base of drift. Drift is the sand, rocks, dirt, topsoil that's under our feet. That's what the drift is. So, and that fluctuates, like I was saying, throughout the state as well. I think it's 22 feet in some areas and 900 in others. So the Antrim is this nice star right here. And that's just to show you the approximate closeness of that to the base of drift. And this is not to scale. This is to show you all the formations that we know about. So the current Collingwood Utica permits and issues, as of now, there's about 20, and I mistyped, there's 21 permits that have been issued. As of now, with gas prices being so low, it seems companies don't even want to go in and explore it, because if you're not going to make your money back, why would you drill the well in the first place? There are pending applications right now because companies are interested in this. There is a potential good source of gas here. It is in a tighter formation, the tight shale rocks, which actually Collingwood is a limestone, but we'll get into that later. So Utica Collingwood geology, bear with me, I'm a geologist, I got to talk about rocks. Your Utica shale, that's something, a big play that they're getting into in eastern Ohio right now. You may have heard about it in the news. They are doing these large-scale hydraulic fracturing systems down there and finding extremely good quantities of gas for production. The difference between the Utica shale and that eastern Ohio play as compared to Michigan's is Michigan's has a much lower organic component to it. With lower organics means less degradation, or anyways, yeah, less production of gas or oil, let's say, from whatever is dying and decomposing in there. The Collingwood, however, has always been thought of as a shale until just this recent play, and it's actually a dark, organic-rich limestone. Looks like a shale, acts like a shale, but it's actually a limestone. So, but with that, those some shale-like attributes to it, the hydraulic fracturing that they've used on it is basically one way to actually help release some of those oil and gas, well, the gas components to it. So our drilling and casing program, as I was saying, it fluctuates from one spot to the next. There is no standard well program. Your conductor pipe, this is one based off of wells in Kalkaska and Mississauga counties. Conductor pipe driven anywhere from 60 feet to maybe 100 feet. That's just to basically get a starting point for the people to start drilling. Everything about this is a normal oil and gas well until you get into that kick point to do into the drilling. So then your surface casing for these wells is into the cold water shale. 704, some of them are actually a little bit deeper than that. It's to ensure that there is complete coverage of those freshwater aquifers. Your intermediate casing shoe down in the Bass Islands, it's a competent rock down there, but you can see it's at 5,083 feet. Then you get into your production casing. The true depth is actually only around 8,900 feet, but the measured depth is 11,133 feet. That's a really long section of hole that's drilled horizontally. So the main reason to do that is to open up more formation to get more exposure so you can get more oil or gas, whatever you're looking at for those, for this particular thing for gas. So then we're looking at Sheboygan County further north. You can see there's a big change here. Your conductor pipe, basically the same, 100 feet. Contingency string though, there is formations up there that are soluble bedrock that you don't want to make sure you're drilling through and just letting the rock dissolve as you're drilling, and then all of a sudden you have these giant caverns down there. So with that, we end having a contingency string to ensure that the hole stays competent while you drill through those cautionary zones to get down to your surface casing. But your surface casing is now at 1,300 feet. 1,300 to 1,400 feet. And that's pretty deep, but that makes sure all those usable aquifers are cased off because there are bedrock formations that people have water wells in. If there's a water well there, we got to seal it. We got to make sure that nothing gets in there to cause problems for it. Your next intermediate casing into the Niagara Formation, which there's a bit of oil and gas play into it, and then your production string all the way down to the Collingwood. So with that, for this particular case, you've got your 4 strings of casing and your conductor pipe, but I don't count that as casing. Spacing issues are really coming up. Your standard spacing is 40 acres for most wells. Some others are in 80-acre spacings. Others are, like the Collingwood, have nothing really set for it. It used to be just a junk formation everybody wanted to get through and who cares about. Now it's something of interest, and we need to find out what is the actual drainage of that. What makes sense? We don't want to have wells on top of wells on top of wells, because that really wastes our natural resources at the surface of making these drill pads. So if we find out that it's a 640 acre, a square mile, then that's what the spacing will be. There is currently a hearing going on in that, and eventually some decision will be made. Your large volume hydraulic fracturing water usage. This is something that really scares a lot of people. You hear about it, your state pioneer here, 6.7 million gallons of water was used. This is in 15 separate stages that they do for your hydraulic fracturing, and we'll go over that in a little bit. But this is a one-time use. In comparison, they withdraw it, and I'll tell you about how the things we have in place to make sure that nobody's wells go dry. But they withdraw it and use that to actually, and with their mixture that I'll talk about in a little bit, to get into this tight shale to actually fracture it. Your Antrim shale wells, which have been around for a long time, around 40,000 to 100,000 gallon. It's a vertical well though, so a little bit different. But still hydraulic fracturing is used on that to help open up naturally occurring fractures in that formation. So how much is 6.7 million gallons? You can see from here's some things to kind of basically get it into perspective. 10 Olympic swimming pools, roughly 10 acres of corn use it over a growing season. And that's a consistent draw from those irrigation systems of over the whole system, but spaced out over a longer period of time as compared to a shorter period of time of where they're withdrawing it from. Your golf course in roughly 33 days. It's definitely not the golf course it's a hack course. But so with that withdrawal, there's a big concern. As you put big stress on your aquifers, if you're pulling out all that water, you get a situation where your water table actually starts to cone or depress downwards because you're having a large draw on it. What we have in place is with any residential well that's within a quarter mile of that source well, they have to have monitoring wells in between those, monitor them on a daily basis to ensure that as they're going through their water withdrawal for this hydraulic process, that water table does not dip. If it dips, stop what you're doing, see what happens. If it rebounds, okay, we can start that process again. But that's to ensure that nobody's well goes dry while they're doing this process, because depending on that soil that they're pulling from, maybe it's a sandy soil. Well, water easily moves through sandy soils. But let's say it has a really high clay component. Water doesn't really move that well through clays, so there might be a slower rebound to it. So we do want to make sure that no one has to worry about a dry well. It's nothing worse than going to the faucet and not having anything. But with that, so the water does rebound. It does end up being through the whole water cycle of being replaced into it, and we'll go into that also. Hydraulic fracturing, what is it? It's actually just a completion process for the well. There's a lot of talk that everything from trucking, etc., that is hydraulic fracturing, but what actual hydraulic fracturing is a procedure used to complete some oil or natural gas wells. They pump the water down the properly sealed cased well into your target formation, varying in depths, and actually perforate into the rock, force it at a high pressure, higher than the natural pressures of that rock formation, to cause those natural fractures to either open up or to create non-natural ones, man-made fractures, for those to open up, to get the sand in there and to open up those formations to let that gas or oil, depending on where you're shooting for, to actually come out easier, to make it a producible quantity. Proppants usually, So again, hydraulic fracturing, there's a bunch of different dictionary terms out there, and you'll see a whole bunch of other different description of it. Basically, it's a process to complete the well They use water, sand, and a small contingent of chemicals to it to pump down the well at high pressures to open up the fractures in that formation to help release gas or hydrocarbons that they're looking for. But still, you know, it's 99.5% is all water and sand and 0.5% is chemicals, but 0.5% of 6.7 million gallons is still a bit of chemicals. So, but this is all stuff that's contained in systems as you're pumping it down into the formation. It's not actually something they're just throwing all over the location. There's a lot of problems with the debate on it. You have your lobbyists that say, well, hydrofracturing is just this little tiny thing right here. And then you have opposition groups, which include a lot of other stuff from drilling, trucking, everything along those lines. It's even some things that aren't even related to hydraulic fracturing. The main concern is really, in all seriousness, probably somewhere in the middle, because there are things that are processed that go with hydraulic fracturing, truck traffic, things along those lines that you can associate with it that might cause disturbances or noises in the community. And there's other things that aren't really associated with it, like some of the things that I've seen on some websites. The history of hydraulic fracturing is not brand new. It's been around since 1947. At least that's the first one on record in Kansas. Good friends Halliburton decided to get the license in 1949, but over the next years, we've actually had improvements in understanding of rock mechanics, which chemicals actually work better for it, do chemicals actually work better for it, things along those lines, modeling, some engineers have gotten into it, and there's a lot of information and a lot that we have learned about it over the time. Michigan, state regulations, we have casing, sealing, water withdrawal. We oversee the whole process of it. I can't stress it enough that everything in this is reviewed and there's no item that's overturned. Review the completion plans. The MSDS sheets are on location, and recently we have been starting to put them on our website as well. We are also working with fracfocus.org to get those chemicals on there. Depressingly, there are some federal laws that do not allow us to disclose certain trade secret chemicals. It sounds like the Democratic Party and the Republicans are trying to work together to try to get that as a law for here, but we'll see how that ends up turning out. But if you've got something that works great, you probably don't want to let your competitors know about it, so I guess I understand. Hydraulic fracturing in Michigan, though. First well that was actually on record is in 1952. So it's done up in Lake County, and since then, over 12,000 wells have been hydraulic fractured in Michigan. These are mostly these Antrim plays up here in the lower peninsula. These are the Antrim shale. They're relatively shallow, and they've had over 12,000 wells done. All of this has been done without a single incident, any sign of adverse impacts to public health or the environment. So 12,000 wells, the track record's pretty good, but that doesn't mean that you pull back and say, oh, everything's fine. You still have to stay on top of this stuff. We still have to make sure that this stuff is good. Vast majority in the Antrim, I already said that, okay. But this is what I was talking about. Your normal drilling location, which from what I understand, most industry representatives, Berry County, everybody's looking at these dolomite, limestone, maybe some sandstone formations. No one, it sounds like land leasing is even willing to put in there, do not hydraulic fracture on my property in those leases. It depends on the company you're looking at. Of course, the companies aren't going to tell me what they're looking at, so maybe there is the possibility, but I don't foresee it, but I have been wrong in the past. This location is ginormous. That's a school bus at the top. Boom. So that gives you a nice little scale there to show you exactly how this is. Your freshwater pit causes a lot of concern too. People think that this is a pit where they are mixing these chemicals and everything up together. There is nothing that can go in that freshwater pit besides fresh water. Maybe a duck lands in it or something along those lines, but that is solely for fresh water, for staging area, so that they have that water on hand, because when they go to do this process, you're moving a lot of water, a lot of fluid, and a lot of sand all at once to brush that down. You need these storage spaces to have that fresh water. So no chemicals, no nothing but fresh water in there. You've got your different systems here of your frac tanks, your pumping trucks. There is a lot of commotion going on here. This is a lot of traffic going on to this location, and as you can tell by the scale, it is a bigger location. So Hydraulically fractured locations would need a much larger scale. Most of your normal wells, 200 by 200 feet, maybe 300 by 300. The 5 most common issues: migration of gas or fluids into fresh water or to other formations. Some people might not care if something goes to another formation, but I do. I like to try to keep everything into the formation that it's supposed to be in. Your identification of chemical and additives. We require the MSDS sheets to be on site. If something were to happen, we know what we need to chase. With that situation, even though they're trade secrets, they still have to let us know what chemicals are there or the overall chemistry, so if something were to happen, we would know how to respond. Your management of flowback water. There's been all sorts of stuff on the internet about where flow water goes and everything along those lines. In Michigan, no flowback water can go to the reserve pit, which is where the drill cuttings go. None of it can go to that fresh water pit. All of that flowback water has to go to these concealed frac tanks that are actually on plastic liners so that there is no possible leaking or anything into the area. I'll show you some of the pictures of some of the stuff I'm talking about. There's a lot of jargon in here, and I'm sorry, I'll try to minimize it so that it's more understandable. Your surface spills. That's where I would be more concerned about, is if something were to happen at the surface. Fluids and the stuff being injected down thousands of feet below your feet, it's down there thousands of feet below your feet. If it was going to come to the surface, the oil and gas that's in that formation would be coming to the surface as well. So the only reason we're going to be getting that oil or gas is through the oil well, or through the well. And then water use. It's a big concern. Water is valuable. But with our water resource, the system, we can keep track, know if that's a okay location for it, know if it's not, and that we'll discuss that in just a little bit too. One of the things that you hear a lot about is somebody's faucet is lights on fire. It's not a funny situation if you're the person whose faucet is lighting on fire, though. But let's look at a couple of situations here on this left map. These red dots on here, if anybody can see them, it's kind of a dissipating map, but you can see these are areas where there is gas in the water well. These are all documented locations prior to oil and gas drilling. Let me emphasize that. These are all locations prior to oil and gas exploration. What happens here is you have what's known as subcropping. You have a formation that has oil or natural gas in it. It's subcrops. It comes up, and instead of the outcrop, like you see like mountains or things on the side, or if you go down 94 by Jackson, you've got that little sandstone that sticks out. I think it's cool. You go through that, the rock has the natural gas in it, or oil, and it'll actually migrate into the natural, into the aquifer. There's nothing we can do about it. That's just what nature is going to do. There's locations in Pennsylvania and all over the place that have that. I don't know too much of the details on the Pennsylvania stuff. I like to focus on Michigan. This is my state. I want to protect it and keep it safe. But this is just to let you know. One of the big things, though, too, that you might see, we have 3 gas wells that are actually producing in the drift. They drilled down. We're going to go over something else. Boom. Hey, we got gas. These are still currently producing in the drift because of these rock formations that come up to the drift, subcrop, let off that gas, and then they're actually pulling the gas from that, which I think is actually a great idea so it doesn't go to other people's locations. But they're producing it from there, so there is naturally occurring gas. It's called biogenetic gas if it's like an organic material that's decomposing, or if it's just naturally coming into the formation. What's in frac fluid? It's a little outdated. 2008 is the source that we have, but this gives you kind of an idea of what's going on with it. You have all these different things that get thrown around there, your surfactants, your chlorides, your scale inhibitors, your gelling agents. There's a lot of different things in here that no one seems to know. And if I wasn't in this area, I wouldn't care what they were. I'd just be like, wait a minute, what is that? So, but with that, these are just things that help keep the sand in solution in the water, or help the rocks fracture, or help it open up. There's just things to help it get that sand in there to help keep those fractures open to produce the gas. Some of them are biocides. That's to make sure that there's no munge that grows in there and seals off those fractures, because if that seals off those fractures, well, your well's pretty much going to be dead. And of course, at the bottom here, your MSDS sheets for chemicals can be found at michigan.gov. That's wrong. /OGS just got axed by our tech group, so if I were you, I'd just go michigan.gov and then in the upper right-hand corner, search Office of Oil, Gas, and Minerals, because the ones zeros, dash, dots, 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 no one can ever write that down and get that right. You can't read these, I'm sorry, but this is supposed to be showing you what fracturing fluid additives are. This comes from Chesapeake Energy. They've got this stuff on the web. Chesapeake Energy has actually been very forthcoming with information, trying to let people know that there is not too much danger for this. Their most plays are in other states. I don't get to work with them, but there could be some concerns in other states, and you guys are well aware of those. But with this, it kind of breaks down what these things are and what they're used for. And I wish I could make those bigger so you can see them, but they try to relate the different things to what stuff is already in use in Michigan. Management of flowback water, like I was saying, all this water that comes from it, we pump down all those millions or thousands of gallons of water. That water's coming back as we go through our test phase. This stuff is all going to be put into these frac tanks, which are on liners to make sure that it's not leaking out into it. There's liners underneath that, and then there's absorbent booms, and we make sure that there's nothing of this coming down onto the site. The freshwater pit you can see is still open. That's the same well pad that we were looking at before, but there is nothing that is being directed to that pit. It is just fresh water. They'll eventually end up encapsulating that there. You've got a testing system in this left picture, but like I said, there is no fluid to pits. Your deep well disposal. All the stuff comes out, not all of it, I'm sorry. This flowback fluid comes out. They have to dispose of that down, dispose of wells that are pre-approved by the state to make sure that they're not just dumping them someplace randomly. But then about roughly 25% to maybe 75% of the fluid comes back. The remainder does stay in the formation and slowly gets produced with that water that might come out with the gas. That same stuff has to be disposed of down the proper disposal wells, so none of it is ever released into the environment. Hydraulic fracturing surface spill prevention. All these trucks that have all these chemicals and everything along those lines have to be on these secondary liners, bermed, ensure that none of this is coming in contact with the soils. If something comes in contact with these soils, we are there to say, get that stuff up now, make sure it's all set, verify that it's clean. You can see this is a crazy system on the left side. There's a lot of pump trucks, there's chemicals, sands, a lot of stuff going on, but all of it is going to be contained on that area, and we're going around making sure. The liners get torn, they have to repair that torn spot because that's a source where it could possibly go into the groundwater. There's been a lot of recent legislation regarding this large-scale withdrawal, and it basically started from a lot of these water bottling plants. But because of that, that has given us a foundation to start on to help protect for these large water withdrawals for these hydraulically fractured wells, these large-scale ones they're looking at. To make sure that if anything is over 100,000 gallons per day, that is a large water withdrawal. 6.7 million gallons does fall over 10,000. So with that, they are deemed to the water withdrawal assessment tool. They have to go through before they can even apply to us to go through this. Supervisors of well instruction. With these horizontal large-scale fracturing jobs, the state has come up with new systems on how to do these large withdrawals, what they have to do in order to get a permit through us, the hoops and everything that they have to jump through in order to make sure things are safe. If it comes back that that's going to be an impact to the environment, they cannot do that water withdrawal. If they still can, or if it comes back they can't do that water withdrawal, but that doesn't mean they still can't drill the well. They can choose to get the water from another location. So there is that situation of they could still drill the well, but they could buy water from someplace else, a potable source, something along those lines, and use it from another place. But in that same situation, we would then have to have them run that water withdrawal assessment tool to ensure that that wouldn't harm that community or wherever they are pulling that water from. There's a lot of hoops and stuff they have to jump through in order to get these permits. So then permitting, we review all their information, their additional data, etc. Continuation of that, your completion, there has to be monitoring wells in place to ensure that everything is going fine. Your freshwater pit shall not create a hazard. That was a giant pit. You just have to make sure it's flagged off so no little Bambi or anybody falls into it and goes for a swim, because then that could just cause a problem. Monitor and record injection pressures so that we know what's going on while it's happening, so that way we know it's going where it's going. Your reporting, your MSDS sheets have to be on location. Your service company records, we review all of that stuff. We know what's going on. When we're on site with that stuff going on too, monitoring your annular pressures, because a big concern is you're putting all this pressure down here. What if it's coming up the backside? With the sealing process of these wells, it's next to impossible. With that, though, you're watching those annular pressures to ensure that nothing's coming up. If the annular pressures, which is the space between one string of casing and the next string of casing, is increasing, then we throw the emergency brake, let's see what's going on, monitor the situation. We haven't had any of those issues so far. Hopefully there won't be any issues of that in the future. And then also keep an eye on what's all this flowback water. Flowback water is the initial water that you're using to fracture it. We want to know how much is coming back, so that way we know how much to expect with the future produced water that will be coming with that natural gas. The water withdrawal assessment tool is a fantastic tool that's been put on. You can go on and play around with it to see what it actually does. However, please do not register what you are doing, because that throws off the system and then we have to fix it up and everything. But with that, you go into that to make sure that everything's fine. It goes over a whole bunch of different situations, basically based on groundwater feed streams, which supports fish populations. There's no groundwater, there's no stream, there's no fish. So we want to make sure that this water is there and it's going to be fine and the environment is not impacted. They have to go through all these models to make sure that it is before they can even withdraw it. But oil and gas industry is volatile. Things change. A situation might occur. While they are going through that, we are working with them to make sure that there is nothing that's going to impact or change the situation. We work really well at making sure that there is no chance for this water to be taken away from somebody and cause problems later on. The water withdrawal model is basically distance matters, it really is, but also soil dependency matters. So geology, there I am again. With that, on that, you're looking at something of they're pulling water out. If the soils are something that's going to be very impacting, or it's a clay enriched, it's going to be hard to basically rebound and pull that water back in, then that's going to be put into the system to make sure that that's not going to cause any problems. This is just basically to give you a visual aid of snow melt. You've got a lot more groundwater in the system, a lot more spring runoff. The summer times tend to be a lot more stressful period. In the winter, you still have a little bit of fluctuation of precipitation into the flow into the system. The water, this takes this into granted. It knows these locations of what's going to be happening, the different seasonal changes, so keeps an eye on that. If they fall into the theoretical program that they're looking at and they go with an A or a B, if they go with an A, they can proceed with their ideas. We still have to monitor that to make sure that they're doing what they're going to be doing. And if something changes, then we have to rerun the tool to make sure it happens. If it comes up into the B range or the C range, we have to review it to make sure that it's going to be fine. Maybe there was a little bit different detail into it. If it's in D, you're not proceeding. So, but regardless, we still even look at it when it's in the A range because you have to be sure. Water withdrawal analysis for high volume fractures. So we review and we oversee it to make sure there is no adverse resource impacts. You'll hear people saying ARI. There's too many abbreviations for too many important information, but adverse resource impacts is to make sure that we're not taking somebody's water. We're not taking water away from a stream. We're not causing the little guppies in the stream to die. We're going to make sure that that stuff is taken care of. Under no circumstances will water withdrawals that are determined to create an actual adverse resource impact be approved. That just can't happen. There's no way that we can allow that to happen because that completely defeats the basic mission of the DEQ, which is to protect public health and our natural resources. So summary and looking forward, there's been regulatory changes and it's always changing. That's the way it works. If we were drilling like we were in the 1930s, this would be a very different discussion I'd be having up here. But we're not. We've learned from our mistakes and we move forward with that. We have looked at the things, and in all seriousness, think about we've had over 12,000 wells that have been hydraulically fractured without a single incident related to the hydraulic fracturing process. But this is the energy sector. There are no 100% guarantees in life. So there are things to be concerned about. I believe some of the other people that have probably done research in the crowd that have seen things that may have happened in other states. There are things that are still under inspection and trying to figure out what's going on. The one thing is, our track record in the state is great, and that's because we have a fantastic regulatory system. We make sure that that fresh water is protected. We make sure that the wells are cased, sealed, and properly worked to ensure that there is no migration of fluids to other places. Other things that they have just started in, which are not a law, but we make companies do is, is to make sure that there's more cement in that projection string above 1,000 feet above the kick point to ensure that that's actually properly sealed off, and that way there's no extra potential or possibility of things happening in there. Looking forward, EPA's, we're still looking at a lot of reviews that they have out there. We've got public outreach. Once again, that website has been kiboshed. So just go michigan.gov, search Office of Oil, Gas, and Minerals, and I'll take you to sites and links and a lot of information there. We have a hearing to go through the Collingwood spacing. In-house, we've got our Utica Collingwood work group that goes over all the stuff, which is really just more focused on hydraulic fracturing to ensure that everything is proper in Michigan. Review of regulations, modifications, chemical disclosures, but overall, we're making sure that this is going to be fine. A lot of good internet resources up here. Michigan.gov has that. I've said that a couple times. Google, Yahoo, and Bing. The Michigan State University Extension Oil and Gas Program. Curtis will be talking to you about that. Geology.com, the United States Environmental Protection Agency to go over, and fracfocus.org.